They thought silence made him an easy target. They were about to learn that respect doesn't need a voice. The dinner rush rolled through Hawthorne Grill like a steady tide, every table filled, every server moving with practiced urgency beneath the warm glow of hanging Edison lights that reflected across polished walnut floors. Plates clinked softly, conversations blended into a pleasant hum, and the smell of grilled steaks and fresh rosemary floated through the air. Ava Brooks balanced a heavy serving tray with the effortless precision that came from years of hard work, even as her feet ached inside shoes that had already survived too many double shifts. At 28, she had mastered the art of smiling through exhaustion, because rent was due every month whether life felt fair or not. Across the hostess stand, Chloe Simmons leaned against the counter, barely hiding a grin as she whispered something to Brianna Reed. Both women glanced toward Ava before looking at the newest reservation highlighted in gold on the seating chart. Table 12.
VIP.
Private request.
No photographs.
Ava noticed their expressions but kept walking. She had learned long ago that curiosity often became another reason for people to laugh at you. Melissa Grant, the restaurant manager, stepped out of her office carrying a sleek black reservation folder. Her polished smile looked friendly enough for customers, but Ava knew the difference between kindness and convenience. Melissa only smiled like that when she expected someone else to pay the price. "Ava," she called sweetly, "I have a special guest for you tonight." Several coworkers immediately fell quiet, exchanging quick looks that felt rehearsed. One busboy lowered his eyes to hide a smirk. Someone near the espresso station quietly muttered, "This is going to be good." Ava hesitated for only a second before walking over. "Table 12, she asked. Melissa nodded with exaggerated enthusiasm.
Exactly.
"Our most important customer tonight. Just remember to speak clearly. Really clearly." Chloe stepped closer, pretending to be helpful. She slipped a wireless translation earpiece into Ava's hand. "Corporate sent this over," she lied. "The guest prefers people to wear it while talking to him. Makes communication easier." Brianna struggled not to laugh. "And don't worry if he doesn't answer. Just keep talking louder." Ava looked at the tiny device, uncertain why something about it felt wrong. Still, refusing an assignment had never ended well for her. She quietly placed the earpiece into one ear while Melissa adjusted her apron with fake affection. "Smile," the manager whispered. "First impressions matter." The dining room continued moving around them, unaware that half the serving staff had already started watching the aisle leading toward table 12. Even a bartender paused while drying a wine glass. Phones remained hidden beneath aprons, ready to capture whatever embarrassment came next. Ava picked up a leather menu, inhaled slowly, and started walking across the room. Every step seemed louder than the last. At the far corner sat a man unlike anyone else in the restaurant. His tailored charcoal suit fit with effortless elegance, his posture perfectly composed, his silver watch catching the soft candlelight each time he lifted a crystal water glass. 3 equally well-dressed associates sat nearby, speaking little, observing everything. The atmosphere around their table felt strangely peaceful despite the invisible gravity surrounding the man at its center. Ethan Park turned his head slightly before Ava reached him, his pale blue eyes calm, thoughtful, almost unreadable. The laughter waiting behind her suddenly felt very far away. As she prepared to greet him exactly as her coworkers expected, something caught her attention. A little boy passing beside the table accidentally dropped a stuffed dinosaur onto the floor. Before anyone else reacted, Ethan bent down, picked up the toy, and with effortless grace signed something gentle to the child using fluent American Sign Language. The little boy's worried face immediately brightened with a smile. Ava stopped walking for the briefest moment. Her fingers tightened around the menu. The earpiece suddenly felt meaningless. She slowly reached up, removed it, slipped it into her apron pocket, and for reasons she couldn't yet explain, smiled with quiet understanding instead. Ava felt the familiar pull of old memories as she lifted her hands and answered Ethan in fluent American Sign Language, her movements calm despite dozens of unseen eyes waiting for disaster. "Good evening. My name is Ava. I will be taking care of your table tonight. I hope you have a peaceful dinner." Ethan's expression changed almost imperceptibly. The guarded distance in his eyes softened into genuine surprise, followed by the smallest smile anyone at the table had probably seen in a long time. His companions exchanged quick glances, but remained respectfully silent. Ethan signed back with graceful confidence. "Thank you. It has been a long time since someone greeted me without hesitation." Ava returned a modest smile before handing him the menu, still communicating through sign language with the natural rhythm she had practiced for years. Around them, the restaurant continued buzzing, but at table 12 everything felt strangely quiet, almost untouched by the noise surrounding them. Across the dining room, Chloe frowned. Brianna lowered the phone she had secretly prepared to record Ava's embarrassment. Melissa folded her arms, clearly confused. None of this matched the scene they had expected. Ava asked about beverage preferences, daily specials, and food allergies entirely through sign language, never rushing, never showing off. To her, it was simply another language, one connected to memories she carried every day. Years earlier, after her father left and her mother worked endless overnight shifts at a nursing home outside Baltimore, Ava had practically helped raise her younger brother Marcus. Marcus had lost his hearing after a severe illness before his 3rd birthday. Specialists were expensive, but kindness had always been free. Every Tuesday evening, their local community center offered free American Sign Language classes taught by retired teachers who believed communication should never depend on wealth. Ava attended every class for nearly 8 years. She completed homework after midnight, memorized vocabulary while riding city buses, and practiced conversations with Marcus until signing became as natural as speaking. After Marcus received a scholarship to a specialized school and eventually became an elementary teacher for deaf children, Ava never stopped signing. It had become part of who she was. Ethan watched her carefully as she described the chef's recommendations with expressive but unpretentious gestures. There was no pity in her eyes, no awkwardness, and certainly no exaggerated politeness. She simply treated him the way every customer deserved to be treated. That simple difference carried more meaning than anyone else in the room could understand. Ethan signed another question. "Where did you learn?" Ava answered honestly. "My little brother taught me as much as I taught him. We grew up learning together." Ethan lowered his gaze briefly before looking back at her with unmistakable respect. "Family is a remarkable teacher," he signed. Ava nodded gently.
Yes.
"It really is." At that very moment, Chloe whispered loudly enough for nearby coworkers to hear, convinced Ethan could not possibly know what was happening around him. "Well, that ruined our little joke." Melissa forced a smile, but frustration flickered across her face. None of them realized that while Ethan could not hear their voices, he had spent a lifetime recognizing the language of people who underestimated others. Their laughter had faded, but their intentions remained visible in every glance they exchanged. And from where Ethan sat beneath the warm restaurant lights, he had already begun noticing far more than they imagined. Ava stepped away from table 12 to place the order, but the quiet exchange she had shared with Ethan lingered in her thoughts like the final note of a familiar song. She had served wealthy customers before, celebrities, athletes, and executives who expected flawless service simply because they could afford it. Ethan was different. His attention never wandered toward expensive decor or the people watching him from across the room. Instead, he noticed small details that everyone else ignored. He thanked the food runner with a respectful nod. He waited patiently while an elderly couple crossed the aisle before allowing his own companions to stand. He looked at every person signing to him, instead of glancing around the room. Those habits could not be purchased. They were built over years of understanding what it felt like to live in a world that often underestimated you. Behind the service station, however, the atmosphere could not have been more different. Chloe slammed a tray onto the stainless steel counter with enough force to rattle several glasses. "How does she know sign language?" she whispered sharply. Brianna folded her arms. "Nobody told us that." Melissa's polished smile had completely disappeared. She looked toward table 12, then back at the hidden phone still sitting beneath a folded napkin. The embarrassing video they had hoped to capture did not exist. Instead, The recording showed Ava communicating with calm confidence while their most important guest smiled for the first time all evening. Melissa reached over and quickly turned the recording off before anyone else could notice. "This is not over," she muttered quietly. She got lucky. A few minutes later, Ava returned carrying the first course with careful, practiced movements. She placed every plate exactly where it belonged before signing each dish with enough detail for Ethan to understand the chef's preparation without overwhelming him. Ethan watched attentively before signing a simple question that caught her by surprise. "Do you enjoy your work?" Ava hesitated for only a heartbeat before answering honestly. "I enjoy serving people who appreciate kindness. The work itself is simply how I pay the bills." Ethan studied her expression for a moment, recognizing the difference between exhaustion and bitterness. She carried one but refused to carry the other. His companions quietly continued their meal, sensing that this conversation meant more than either participant intended to reveal. Across the room, Chloe suddenly approached Melissa with an exaggerated smile. "I have another idea," she whispered. "If she wants to impress him so badly, let us see what happens when she signs something she cannot possibly explain." Melissa considered the suggestion for several seconds before nodding almost imperceptibly. She scribbled a sentence onto a small order pad, folded the paper, and slipped it beneath a dessert plate waiting in the kitchen. "Tell Ava this is a personal welcome message from the restaurant," she instructed another server. "Ask her to sign every word exactly as written." None of them bothered reading the note carefully after copying it from an online translation website. None of them knew whether the gestures actually matched the English sentence. They only cared that the trap looked convincing. Moments later, the folded paper found its way into Ava's hands beside the dessert station. She unfolded it while waiting for the pastry chef to finish plating fresh cheesecake. Her eyes moved slowly across the awkward wording. Then her brow furrowed. Something about the sentence felt completely wrong, not only grammatically but culturally, as though someone had translated each word without understanding its meaning. She quietly looked across the dining room toward Ethan. He happened to lift his eyes at exactly the same moment. Neither of them smiled this time. Somehow, without speaking a single word, both understood that the evening had just changed. The folded note rested in Ava's hand as though it carried far more weight than a single sheet of paper ever should. She read it again while the pastry chef carefully added fresh strawberries beside the cheesecake. The sentence looked polished in English, but the suggested signs beside it made no sense. Whoever had prepared it had copied isolated gestures from the internet without understanding that American Sign Language followed its own grammar, rhythm, and culture. Signed exactly as written, the message would not sound welcoming. It would sound awkward, confusing, and deeply disrespectful. Ava quietly folded the paper and slipped it into her apron pocket instead of memorizing it. She carried the dessert toward table 12, feeling dozens of curious eyes following every step. Chloe stood near the beverage station pretending to polish silverware while Brianna casually lifted her phone again beneath the counter. Melissa remained beside the hostess stand with the confident expression of someone convinced the next few minutes would finally restore her control. Ethan looked up as Ava approached. She gently placed the dessert before him, then paused. Instead of repeating the meaningless translation from the note, she signed naturally. "Our pastry chef prepared this cheesecake with fresh local strawberries tonight. He hopes you enjoy it, and everyone in our kitchen appreciates your visit." Ethan watched her hands carefully before smiling with unmistakable warmth. "Please thank your chef for me," he signed back. Real communication always tastes better than rehearsed words. Ava blinked, surprised by the comment. Ethan's eyes shifted briefly toward the edge of her apron where the folded paper created the smallest outline beneath the fabric. He signed another question with quiet precision. "Someone gave you different words, did they not?" Ava hesitated. She had promised herself never to involve customers in workplace drama. Yet something about Ethan's calm expression reminded her of Marcus, whenever he patiently waited for people to stop pretending everything was fine. Finally, she answered honestly. "Someone asked me to repeat a translation that was incorrect. I decided respect was more important than obedience." Ethan lowered his hands for a moment, studying her face with thoughtful silence. Then he nodded once. That was the correct decision. Around them the room continued moving, but Melissa noticed immediately that nothing had gone according to plan. She frowned as Brianna replayed the recording on her phone. Instead of confusion or embarrassment, the video showed Ethan smiling while Ava signed with effortless confidence. Chloe quietly muttered. She ignored the note. Melissa's jaw tightened. No, she whispered. She understood the note. That realization unsettled her far more than failure itself. Across the dining room, one of Ethan's associates leaned slightly toward him and signed a brief question. Ethan answered without taking his eyes off Ava. His companion looked toward the service station where Melissa, Chloe, and Brianna stood whispering together. He noticed the hidden phone. He noticed the nervous glances. He noticed the folded expressions that always appeared when people believed no one important was watching. Ethan noticed all of it as,
well,
living without hearing had sharpened other forms of observation until small behaviors spoke louder than conversations ever could. He could not hear their laughter, but he recognized ridicule the same way sailors recognized approaching storms long before the clouds arrived. As Ava collected the empty appetizer plates, she sensed that the atmosphere inside the restaurant had quietly shifted. The prank everyone expected had disappeared without making a sound. In its place stood something far more uncomfortable for those who had planned it. For the first time that evening, the people hiding behind smiles were beginning to wonder whether they had underestimated not only the waitress they tried to humiliate, but also the quiet man who seemed to understand far more than anyone had imagined. As the evening settled into a quieter rhythm, the golden light above table 12 seemed warmer than the rest of the dining room, although nothing about the fixtures had changed. Ava cleared the dessert plates with the same quiet professionalism she had shown since the beginning of her shift, refusing to glance toward the service station where Melissa and the others still whispered among themselves. Years of working in restaurants had taught her that some people measured success by the number of others they could embarrass. She had learned to measure it differently. If every guest left feeling respected, she considered the night a victory. Ethan gently folded his linen napkin and placed it beside his plate before looking back at Ava. With slow, deliberate movements, he signed another question. Do you still visit your brother often? The question caught her by surprise. She smiled before answering. Every Sunday, after church. He teaches children at a school for deaf students now. I still bring him my homemade peach cobbler because he insists nobody else makes it correctly. Ethan laughed silently, his shoulders lifting ever so slightly. My grandmother used to say recipes are another language families pass to one another. Ava nodded. She believed that completely. Then Ethan signed something that caused her expression to soften. I was born without hearing. Many people spent years trying to teach me how to live in their world. Very few ever tried to meet me in mine. Ava looked at him with quiet understanding rather than sympathy. My brother says the same thing. People think speaking louder solves everything. Listening with kindness is much harder. Ethan held her gaze for a brief moment before looking down at his hands. When I was a child, teachers rewarded students for speaking clearly. They rarely rewarded classmates who learned to sign. I never forgot that difference. Ava answered without hesitation. Marcus always says communication is not about perfect words. It is about making another person feel included. Ethan smiled again, this time with unmistakable gratitude. Across the room, one of his associates observed the exchange with thoughtful curiosity. He had attended countless business dinners over the years and had rarely seen Ethan engage in such a relaxed conversation with someone he had only just met. There was no negotiation taking place, no careful strategy, no discussion of business. There was only genuine human connection, built one respectful gesture at a time. Meanwhile, Melissa watched the interaction with growing frustration. Every minute Ava remained at that table seemed to erase another piece of the story she had hoped to create. Customers nearby had begun noticing the graceful exchange of sign language. A young couple paused their conversation to watch with quiet admiration. An elderly woman smiled warmly before returning to her meal. Even a little girl sitting several tables away began asking her parents what the beautiful hand movements meant. What Melissa had intended as public humiliation was slowly becoming the most uplifting moment in the restaurant that evening. Chloe noticed the change as well. "This is making her look good," she whispered nervously. Brianna lowered her phone, realizing there would never be a humiliating video to post online. Instead, every second of footage captured patience, dignity, and mutual respect. Melissa clenched her jaw, but said nothing. She could already feel the atmosphere slipping beyond her control. Ethan slowly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a simple business
card.
Instead of handing it over immediately, he placed it beside his folded napkin and signed one final sentence before Ava excused herself to help another table. Sometimes the kindest people walk into our lives because someone else tried to make them feel small. They forget that character always speaks louder than cruelty. Ava read the words in his hands and felt something shift quietly inside her. Neither of them realized that another pair of eyes had been watching every moment from the entrance to the dining room, and what that person had witnessed would soon change the course of everyone else's evening. The business card remained untouched beside Ethan's neatly folded napkin long after Ava returned to the rhythm of the dinner rush. She did not assume it was meant for her, and she certainly did not allow herself to imagine that the evening had become anything more than a brief encounter between a respectful customer and a grateful server. Experience had taught her that hope often arrived wearing the same face as disappointment. She simply continued refilling water glasses, greeting new guests with the same warmth she offered everyone, and quietly helping a new busser who looked overwhelmed during his first Friday night shift. Ethan noticed every one of those moments. He watched her pause to help an elderly gentleman read the dessert menu after misplacing his glasses. He saw her kneel beside a little girl who had accidentally dropped her crayons, returning each one with the same patient smile she had offered him earlier. None of those gestures appeared rehearsed. They were habits built into her character long before this evening began. At the entrance, the restaurant owner, Charles Whitmore, stepped inside after returning from a charity board meeting across town. His tailored navy suit contrasted with the white chef coats moving through the kitchen doors, yet he greeted every employee by name as he made his way across the dining room. Charles prided himself on knowing his staff, but tonight something unusual caught his attention. Customers kept looking toward table 12, not with curiosity or excitement, but with quiet admiration. He followed their gaze and saw Ava communicating fluently in American Sign Language, while Ethan responded with genuine ease. Charles slowed his pace. He had visited enough restaurants over the years to recognize authentic hospitality when he saw it. Before he could ask a single question, Melissa hurried over with an uneasy smile. She began explaining that everything was under control and that one of their servers had unexpectedly known sign language. Her words sounded polished, but Charles noticed the nervous glances passing between Melissa, Chloe, and Brianna. Years of running successful businesses had taught him that people often revealed themselves long before they realized anyone was paying attention. Meanwhile, Brianna quietly replayed the recordings on her phone, hoping to find at least one embarrassing moment they could still laugh about after work. Instead, every clip showed something entirely different. There was Ava patiently signing menu descriptions, Ethan smiling with visible appreciation, nearby guests watching with growing respect. Then the camera accidentally captured Melissa handing Ava the folded note near the dessert station. The audio did not matter. The sequence alone raised uncomfortable questions. Brianna quickly locked her phone when she realized Charles was walking in her direction, but she was already too late. He had noticed the hurried movement and the anxious expressions surrounding her. Charles asked calmly if everything was all right. No one answered immediately. Silence spread through the service station more effectively than any accusation could have. Across the room, Ethan observed the exchange without interrupting his companions. He signed a brief message to the associate seated beside him, who nodded once before quietly standing and walking toward Charles. The two men exchanged a polite handshake. There were no dramatic gestures, no raised voices, only a respectful conversation lasting less than a minute. When it ended, Charles looked toward Ava with unmistakable surprise before turning back to Melissa. The confidence that had carried the manager through the evening quietly disappeared. She suddenly understood that whatever story she planned to tell was no longer the only version anyone would hear, and for the first time since the prank began, she realized the truth had found witnesses she could not influence. Charles did not raise his voice when he asked Melissa to step into the private office beside the hostess stand. He simply held out his hand with quiet authority, and after a brief hesitation, Brianna reluctantly placed her phone into it. The restaurant continued serving dinner as though nothing unusual had happened, yet an invisible stillness settled over the dining room. Customers sensed that something important was unfolding even if they could not hear a single word. Ava remained focused on her work, completely unaware that the recordings meant to humiliate her were now being reviewed by the very person responsible for protecting the restaurant's reputation. Ethan watched the scene without interruption. His expression remained composed, but his attention never drifted. Years of relying on observation instead of sound had taught him to recognize truth hidden inside ordinary moments. Charles carefully reviewed each video in silence. The first recording showed Ava greeting Ethan with confidence through American Sign Language. The second captured Melissa handing her the folded note, while Chloe and Brianna exchanged knowing smiles. Another clip accidentally revealed Chloe quietly laughing before Ava ever reached the table, proving that the evening had been planned long before the first order was taken. There was no dramatic confession because none was necessary. The recording spoke with remarkable clarity. Charles slowly lowered the phone and looked at Melissa. She attempted to explain that it had only been harmless workplace humor and that nobody expected the situation to become serious. Charles listened without interrupting, but disappointment gradually replaced surprise. Hospitality depended on trust. A restaurant could recover from a broken plate or an overcooked steak. It recovered much more slowly from employees who treated another person's dignity as entertainment. While that conversation continued behind the office door, Ethan quietly stood from his chair. His companions rose with him, but instead of heading toward the exit, Ethan walked across the dining room until he stopped a respectful distance from the service station where Ava was arranging fresh coffee cups. She looked up, slightly surprised to see him there. Ethan smiled gently before signing a question. "May I borrow a few moments of your time?" Ava nodded. "Of course." Nearby customers gradually noticed the silent conversation and instinctively lowered their own voices. Ethan signed with calm precision. "Earlier this evening, someone tried to use my disability as part of a joke. Someone else tried to use your kindness the same way. You refused to participate in either one." Ava lowered her eyes for a moment before answering. "My mother always told me that another person's challenge should never become our opportunity to feel superior." Ethan's smile widened ever so slightly. That is wisdom many people never learn. He reached into his jacket and finally offered the business card he had kept beside his plate all evening. This time Ava accepted it politely. She glanced down and noticed only a name, a direct phone number, and no impressive title beneath it. Ethan signed another sentence before she could respond. "If you ever decide your kindness deserves a workplace that values it, call me. Opportunities should be earned through character, not through perfect circumstances." Before Ava could answer, the office door quietly opened. Charles stepped back into the dining room with Melissa, Chloe, and Brianna following several steps behind. The confidence that had defined them only an hour earlier had completely disappeared. Charles looked first at Ava, then at Ethan, before speaking softly enough that only those nearby could hear. "There are evenings that remind us what hospitality truly means. Tonight was one of them." In that quiet moment, every person standing nearby understood that the evening was no longer about a failed prank. It had become a mirror, revealing exactly who each person had chosen to be when they believed nobody important was watching. Charles allowed the silence to settle before speaking again, because some truths carried more weight when they were not rushed. Melissa stood with her, hands clasped tightly in front of her while Chloe and Brianna avoided looking at anyone around them. The confidence that had fueled their laughter earlier had disappeared beneath the quiet realization that every choice leaves evidence behind. Charles looked at the three employees with measured disappointment rather than anger. He explained that respect was not listed anywhere in the employee handbook because it should never have required a written policy. It was the foundation of every genuine act of hospitality. Turning another person's disability into entertainment and using a coworker as the centerpiece of that joke violated everything the restaurant claimed to represent. Melissa quietly apologized, insisting she had underestimated the consequences of what had started as a prank. Chloe admitted she had searched for inaccurate sign language online because she thought it would be funny if Ava embarrassed herself in front of an important guest. Brianna lowered her head and confessed that she had recorded everything because she expected the video to spread across social media by morning. Charles listened carefully before responding. He explained that intentions mattered, but actions shaped culture. When people believed humiliation was harmless, kindness slowly disappeared from the workplace. He informed Melissa that she would no longer continue as dining room manager and that the company would begin an immediate review of leadership practices throughout the restaurant. Chloe and Brianna were each suspended pending additional training and evaluation, not because they deserved public humiliation themselves, but because they needed an opportunity to understand the difference between laughter that united people and laughter that excluded them. Neither woman argued. For the first time all evening, they seemed to recognize the quiet cost of what they had done. Across the dining room, several customers who had witnessed pieces of the evening exchanged thoughtful glances before returning to their meals. No applause filled the room. No dramatic celebration followed. Instead, the restaurant felt calmer than it had all night, as though honesty itself had restored something. Invisible, Ethan turned toward Charles and signed a brief message. One of his associates interpreted only because Charles did not know sign language. He said that accountability handled with dignity creates stronger people than humiliation ever will. Charles nodded appreciatively before making a silent promise to himself that every manager in his company would soon receive training in disability awareness and inclusive communication. Ava remained standing near the service station, still absorbing everything that had unfolded. She had arrived expecting another ordinary shift and found herself at the center of a lesson that had reached far beyond a single dining room. Ethan walked over once more and signed a final thought before preparing to leave. Tonight you reminded everyone that communication begins with respect, not with perfect hearing or perfect words. Ava smiled gently. My brother says every person deserves someone willing to meet them where they are. Ethan's eyes reflected quiet admiration. Your brother sounds like an extraordinary teacher. So are you. He inclined his head respectfully before leaving the restaurant with his companions. As the front doors closed behind them, the warm evening air drifted briefly through the entrance, and Ava looked down at the simple business card still resting in her hand. Earlier it had seemed like an unexpected gesture from a gracious customer. Now it felt like the beginning of a future she had never imagined, one built not on luck or sympathy, but on the quiet strength of choosing dignity when everyone else expected surrender. The restaurant closed later than usual that night. The last candle was extinguished, the final chair lifted onto a table, and the familiar sounds of dishes being washed echoed softly through the empty dining room. Ava stood alone for a moment beneath the same warm lights where the evening had begun, turning Ethan's business card gently between her fingers. It was remarkable how a single shift could change without anyone raising a voice. Earlier that afternoon, she had walked through those front doors expecting nothing more than another paycheck, another exhausting night, and another quiet reminder that some people would always underestimate her. Instead, she walked away carrying something far more valuable than opportunity. She carried proof that kindness had a way of finding those willing to protect it. 2 weeks later, Ava received a phone call from a professional office in downtown Chicago. The voice on the other end introduced itself as Ethan Park's executive assistant and invited her to meet with him regarding a new hospitality initiative. Curious but cautious, Ava accepted. The office overlooked the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, yet the first thing she noticed was not the elegant furniture or the impressive view. It was the reception desk where every employee greeted visitors in both spoken English and American Sign Language. Ethan welcomed her with the same quiet smile she remembered from the restaurant. He explained that several of his companies had quietly supported accessibility programs for years, but he wanted to expand those efforts beyond charitable donations. He wanted restaurants, hotels, and customer service teams to understand that inclusion should never depend on chance encounters. Then, he offered Ava a position leading hospitality training, focused on respectful communication with guests who were deaf or hard of hearing. She stared at him in disbelief before asking the obvious question. Why me? Ethan answered without hesitation. Because technical skills can be taught. Character cannot. You treated me with dignity before you knew anything about me. That is exactly the kind of leadership people remember. Ava accepted the opportunity, not because it came from a powerful businessman, but because it reflected everything her mother and brother had taught her throughout her life. Months passed, and the training programs spread across dozens of businesses. Employees who had never considered learning American Sign Language before now practiced simple greetings with genuine enthusiasm. Families with deaf children began leaving handwritten notes describing how welcome they finally felt while dining together. Marcus visited one training session and watched proudly as hundreds of hospitality workers signed, "Welcome. We are happy you are here." He quietly wiped away a tear before hugging his sister. Back at Hawthorne Grill, Charles continued transforming the workplace culture. New employee orientation now included disability awareness, respectful communication, and the simple reminder that every guest deserved equal dignity regardless of background or ability. Melissa eventually wrote Ava a sincere handwritten letter accepting full responsibility for her choices and thanking her for responding to cruelty with grace instead of revenge. Ava replied with forgiveness because she believed changed hearts accomplished more than lingering resentment ever could. On a quiet Sunday afternoon after church, Ava and Marcus sat together on a park bench sharing homemade peach cobbler while children laughed nearby. Marcus signed with a gentle smile. "I always told you that hands can speak louder than voices." Ava laughed softly before looking toward the bright autumn sky. "They can," she signed back, "especially when they choose kindness first." Somewhere across the city, Ethan happened to glance at a framed photograph from the opening day of the new hospitality program. In the center stood Ava, smiling beside employees of every background, all signing the same welcoming message together. He smiled to himself before returning to work. And on that ordinary day, without applause, without headlines, and without anyone trying to claim the spotlight, a simple act of respect continued traveling from one person to another, quietly proving that dignity is never measured by who speaks the loudest, but by who chooses to make others feel seen.